While Shakespeare was writing some of his greatest plays, Britain's first chemical industry was getting underway in Yorkshire. How long were they producing alum here?
Well, this particular site, probably only until the 1640s. Then various people started establishing new works on the coast.
I suppose on the coast, the cliffs there would reveal the strata pretty clearly, and by then they must have identified the colour and the texture of the good, rich alum-bearing shales.
Yes, it's exactly the same geological series as you're looking at here.
Barry explained that within 50 years they'd found those same shales on the coast. I was intrigued by the crucial question of how they managed to extract the alum from the shale. This was long before chemistry had been developed as a science. So I headed back to Peak Quarry at Ravenscar, where I'd started. Right here on the cliff top at Peak, they carried out the complex and lengthy process which they'd worked out was needed to get the alum from the shale. Industrial archaeologist Gary Marshall showed me how they did it.
They're bringing the shale from the back of the quarry to this area that we're standing on, which is a natural amphitheatre, and then tip the shale to make up a raft of shale over a bed of brushwood. That would then be ignited, and successive layers were then built up to burn the shale. Probably would have burnt for up to about a year.
So you're saying they piled shale over the whole of the base of this amphitheatre?
That's right. I mean, this is probably up to about 150 feet in length and possibly about 100 feet in height.
After building up the huge piles of shale, called clamps, they were burnt, amazingly for about 9 months. This was all possible because the shales contain a lot of organic material trapped as the rock was formed. The burning process, known as calcining, triggered a series of chemical reactions which produced aluminium sulfate, the raw material for alum. It's gigantic. Just on an astonishing scale. I mean, the amount of manual labour involved in doing that is just amazing. And in some old paintings, you can clearly see the size of the whole operation. There are still bits of burnt shale lying around this site.
Well, this shows the shale before and after it's been burnt. You can see quite clearly the difference between the raw grey shale and the red shale after the calcining process.
Yeah. So that's the result of 9 months baking.
That's right.
And what do they do with it now?
They would wash this calcined shale with water to create what was known as a raw alum liquor.
But there was still a lot more to the process. After soaking the shale for a month, the raw alum liquor was fed down a specially constructed ditch lined with timber. Well, at least it was a liquid. They didn't have to wheelbarrow it down.
That's right. They were using gravity to carry this liquid about.
A bit further down were some stone ruins, perched at the top of the cliffs, overlooking the sea. Here, I discovered, is where the really clever chemistry needed to produce the alum took place. And this is where the raw liquor came down the hill.
We're on the alum house itself now. It went through a very rapid boiling. It was then poured into this cistern to cool for about 24 hours. And on this lower part of the site, they went through a second stage of evaporation.
More boiling.
More boiling, that's right.
Yeah. All this boiling used prodigious quantities of coal, up to 10 tonnes for every single tonne of alum produced. Gary told me the final step in creating the alum was to increase the alkalinity. Alkalinity, they wanted.
Alkalinity, yes, that's right. And the source of that alkalinity was actually human urine, rather bizarrely. And not just any old human urine, but it had to be stale so that the ammonia had already come out of the urine. And once that had been added, you get your first alum crystals.
But these crystals had to be purified, which meant yet more boiling and settling and crystallisation. It was extraordinary to think of this lengthy and involved process going on in this remote location as far back as the 1650s.
It's clear to me that with this great elaborate set of buildings here, this elaborate, complicated process, alum must have been a very valuable material.
That's right, it's incredible.
Astonishing.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to get a picture of how this system worked, how very different it would have been a few hundred years ago. There's a busy quarry up there getting the alum shales.
And down below would have been a massive works, fed with raw liquor from above and processing it into the finished product. The scale of the operation at Peak made me wonder how far this industry spread. How big did it become? How much did it shape this part of the coast? Most of the area is now part of the North Yorkshire Moors National Park. I arranged to meet the park archaeologist, Graham Lee, at Saltwick Bay near Whitby.
How big was this alum industry in this part of the world?
Well, it stretched for about 25 miles along the coast and about 25 miles inland.
It's a pretty huge industry then, really.
It is. I mean, you can get some idea of the impact on the landscape. I mean, that nab was once connected to the land.
So that was a headland?
That was a headland. Now, clearly there has been erosion from the tide, but the alum quarry lies behind that, and a huge amount of material has been quarried away. I mean, overall along the coast, there are estimates that up to 25 million tonnes of shale and rock has been removed.
As Graham took me to other alum works on precipitous cliffs, I could see that what at first sight seemed natural was a landscape that had been completely reshaped by this industry. What's remarkable is that all these works were in remote locations, far from roads or towns, but they weren't as inaccessible as it seems.
The roads would have been too bad for wheeled wagons that were required at the alum works, but here they've got the sea. So they're coming in by boat, they're bringing their loads by sea.
They could use sea transport, which in the 17th century was much better than overland. They got the finished alum down the cliffs on tracks. And at Peak, those traces of masonry I'd seen earlier were the remains of an inclined ramp where pack horses would have brought the barrels of alum down to the beach. But then what did they do with it? A couple of miles along the coast, where you can still drive down to the beach, Graham showed me.
The real key is this, the halting carts. This is what made it all work. This is the link between the boats on the foreshore and the alum works.
So this was very much the style of cart, and the width between the wheels, that would have fitted those ruts.
Exactly. I mean, you've got the gauge of the wheels we know is about 4 feet 4 inches, because that fits to the rutways.
To the rutways, yes.
So that we see along the coast here, and they're like tramways cut into the rock of the foreshore so that the carts can move around, presumably on a turning tide, or possibly after dark.
Yeah.
The nearest rutways were 2 miles away, but even along this relatively flat stretch of beach, I could see that it wasn't easy for the cart, and it didn't even have a load.
It's pretty terrible terrain, isn't it? I mean, the trackways really would have made a difference.
Well, that's right. I mean, even this piece of the shore is relatively level, but it's still difficult going.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine the cart fully laden,
Yeah, that's right.
it would have made a huge difference.
I suppose we can imagine this was like a primitive railway system in a way.
Exactly.
So the tracks were a crucial component of the system, guiding the carts laden with the